It's Stella from It's Too Late to Apologize, and I'm here with a book review, and today I'm going to be talking about A War Like No Other by Victor Davis Hanson. So A War Like No Other is quite a departure from the books I usually talk about on this channel. My tastes have changed a bit. It all started with me wanting to read some Nietzsche. So I picked up some Nietzsche. The Birth of a Tragedy was practically written in another language. So when I read Nietzsche's A Birth of a Tragedy, I absolutely had no idea what was going on. I knew next to nothing about ancient Greek politics, so I understood nothing. Like nothing. So I decided to fix that with some Greek history and some Greek playwrights. And this, my friends, is how my to-be read pile never gets any smaller. Anyways, back to A War Like No Other. This book is about the Peloponnesian War, which was basically Athens against Sparta. This read was so frighteningly contemporary, even though it took place about 2,500 years ago. This quote especially stood out to me. "It is not a just thing that all that was won through poverty should be destroyed in prosperity." This quote was attributed to the Corinthians, a Spartan ally to the rest of the Peloponnesian, which is southern Greece, to convince them to go to war with Athens. At the time, Athens was modern and powerful, but wouldn't mind its own business. It was constantly trying to impose its democratic capitalist vision on the surrounding Greek cities. But Athens had also gotten soft, or so the Peloponnesians thought. The Spartans, like the Corinthians, wanted to respect their ancestors who had died at the Battle of Thermopylae for Greek freedom from imperialist Persia. And while the Spartans' self-imposed restrictions on things like luxuries and gluttony made them old-fashioned compared to Athens, it really kept them tough. And rather than have all their possible allies be slowly lost to democracy and financially enslaved to Athens by imperial tribute, or eroded into weakness and eventually overcome by Athens, they decided to strike first to ensure their freedom from the scourge of democracy. I find this fascinating and timely stuff, politically, especially when you consider that Athens lost a quarter of its population to the plague that hit the city during the war. These are some of the same arguments had today about politics, capitalism, and personal freedom. This was a war that Hanson said lasted 27 years, and I say that because others think it lasted longer, or some break it down into several wars. But either way, this drawn-out war lasted as long as it did because landlocked Sparta had land supremacy with its hoplite army, and Athens had an unrivaled navy. Athens controlled the seas and Sparta commanded the land, and neither force wanted to meet the other and clash their weakness against the other's strength. Sparta refused to meet Athens at sea as it had no navy, and Athens refused to meet Sparta army to army on land. This conflict really changed how wars were fought in ancient Greece. This war wasn't about an army meeting an army in a field and having that outcome decide things, as was considered the honorable and traditional way in Greece. Instead, it became a Greek civil war, and in terms of the percentages of lives lost, it was one of the most awful civil wars in early recorded history, where Hanson writes, "Conventional battles, terrorism, revolutions, assassinations, and mass murder all unfolded at once among a baffling array of shifting allies and enemies." This book, though, is not about understanding the chronological order of the war or even the political and strategic thinking behind the war. That would be better covered in something like this, which is Thucydides' account of the war. This is going to take me a while to get through. What this book is great at understanding, though, is the experience of battle and the dirty fighting involved in it. A lot of the chapter names say it best. Chapters like A War Against the Land, A War in the Shadows, The Disaster at Sicily, and The War at Sea. Something I found especially interesting in this book was how military leadership was addressed. Greeks usually gave little power to their generals. They were usually expected to lead their army or fleet from the first rank and usually died in battle. This approach really stunted any possible tactical innovation by preventing long military careers and the perspectives that come with that experience. But after 3 decades of war, the Greeks finally realized that generals were military assets. Hanson writes, "Personalities such as Alcibiades, Cleon, Demosthenes, Thrasybulus, Brasidas, and Lysander were not anonymous warriors, but leaders who were expected to exercise intellectual options that might achieve victory by superior logistics, finance, or public relations. But whose generals were more gifted, Sparta or Athens? Sparta seems to win there. If and when Spartan generals died, it was mostly in battle as opposed to the Athenian generals who were usually executed or exiled upon return home. Athens went through generals like some people go through Netflix series. When it came to brilliant military leadership, it was Sparta that claimed the most numbers. Athens' generals were cautious, indecisive, but this difference in leadership might be less about talent and more about the weight that democratic Athens placed on their generals. Athens' generals were held personally accountable for any wrong done, whether it was actual failure or just perceived ones. Alcibiades, Athens' most gifted general, was called back to the capital to face charges for sacrilege in the middle of a war he was winning battles in. I mean, dude was kind of shady. He ditched Athens, went over to Sparta, and then ditched Sparta and joined with Persia, and then went back to Athens when they convinced him to. I mean, damn, that dude got around. But seriously, who would want such a responsibility as general, if even after winning a victory in battle, it could be turned into some perceived wrong and result in execution or banishment and lose everything? Apparently cancel culture's not you, it's just making a comeback. But what is interesting is that while democratic Athens boasted a free vision for its people, it was often less understanding and cruel to its own people through unreasonable expectations placed on its leaders and without the ability to forgive. It suffered from segmented and timid leadership, which arguably cost them the war. Not that Sparta was perfect or anything like that. They had their own issues for sure, but I found that really interesting when Hanson touched on those topics. By the end of the war, Athens, a once beautiful, thriving democracy, was left defenseless, broke, starving, and near revolution. All that said, I really enjoyed this book and would highly recommend it to anybody interested in war history or politics. If you like any of those things or have read this book, leave me a comment below. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.